What's up, everybody? This is Charlie Potter, senior team writer for BamaOnLine, and we got some actual live football to talk about. It's exciting. Week one in the books. Once we get to week one, man, it just starts to roll. We're already week two, midway through. It's almost here, and Alabama's going to take on South Florida at home. The second game in a home, or not a home and home series, but a 2-for-1 series. And looking forward to being back in Bryant-Denny on Saturday, as I know these two guys are. And we're going to kind of recap the first week real quick, just kind of look back at the Western Kentucky game. Alabama won 63-0. And I think there were kind of a lot of surprises in that game. It kind of maybe went the way we expected, but some unexpected as well. So we'll start with Jimmy. Just what was your biggest takeaway, biggest surprise from the first game of the season?
My biggest surprise was just, frankly, that Alabama shut Western Kentucky out entirely. I mean, I wasn't surprised that they played well defensively. I wasn't surprised that they limited Western Kentucky, but that they limited Western Kentucky to about 150 total yards and 0 points. Western Kentucky has a national reputation for offense. They're a traditional high-scoring team. The quarterback threw for over 500 yards, in a bowl win. They won 8 games a year ago. They often produce high-scoring offenses. Just the fact that they were able to shut them out. They have a lot of, the quarterback played at 2 SEC schools and started games and is the Texas State single season passing, all-time passing leader. Just the shutout, the goose egg, and holding them to 150 yards. That was the biggest surprise to me. That's impressive stuff.
Yeah, I thought you might say that Ron Williams scored 2 touchdowns, but I don't think that was a surprise to you. So big day for Ryan, big day for a lot of guys. So thrown over to Blake, what was your biggest surprise from week one?
I was actually going to go and talk about Ryan because I think we all think Ryan Williams was going to be good, but I don't know if we expected him. Maybe Jimmy did, but I don't know if the rest of us expected him to kind of pop the way he did in his first ever college football game. 2 catches, 139 yards. 2 touchdowns. His first catch went for 84 yards. I expected him to come on the field and maybe not necessarily be a starter, but he was a starter. He was on the field for the first snap. And then just every time he touched it, he took it to the house. And maybe expected him to come out and have maybe a couple catches for maybe 50, 60 yards in the opener, kind of show that he is worthy of playing time. But instead, he showed he might be already the best receiver on this roster with the way he got open on that go route, maybe kind of a busted coverage from Western Kentucky, let him run open. But then what really impressed me was the second touchdown, the move he made in the open field to break those tackles and score. For him to account for 60, 70%, whatever the number is, of the starting quarterback's total yardage in his first start is incredible. And I think that just shows how good of a player he is and that he's going to be that from the jump from game one. That's about as impressive as of an opener from an Alabama skill player that really it's up there with some of the great ones. I don't know if anyone's really had a better one, especially from the wide receiver position. So I think that jumped out to me. I figured that would come eventually this season, but I didn't necessarily expect it in game one.
No, I don't think we've seen a wide receiver have that debut, at least not in the Nick Saban era. It took Amari Cooper a couple games to get rolling. Those young wideouts had to wait their turn. Guys like Devontae Smith and Jerry Jeudy, even Jalen Waddle. So a big coming out party for Ryan Williams. I think that was the case for a lot of guys. I think defensively, kind of piggybacking on what Jimmy said, there was a lot of guys that stood out on that side of the ball. I thought Jahad Campbell was really impressive. But some of the new faces on that side of the ball with Keon Sabb having a couple interceptions. We saw Quay Russaw start on the defensive side of the ball. I thought he looked really good. And then the fact that we saw so much rotation in the back end with, I think, 7 different defensive backs playing meaningful minutes in the first half. We saw 4 true freshmen, 3 of them at the cornerback position, and then Red Morgan at the Husky position. There was just a lot of movement back there. I think it's good to get those guys experience. And I think we kind of anticipated it a little bit, but maybe not as much as we saw, at least me personally. Xavier Brown got the start opposite Damani Jackson. In that second series, we saw Zay Mincy, Jalen Mbakwe come in. So, those guys need the reps, and they certainly got them on Saturday. And I think that could continue because I thought they all played pretty well. I think another big surprise, speaking for the group here, I think we can all agree, was no Kadyn Proctor in the first game of the season. He's a guy that sustained a shoulder injury in pregame warmups, and we saw Elijah Pritchett kind of step in at left tackle. We thought we were going to see Pritchett rotate, speaking of rotation with the defensive backs, with Wilkin Formby at right tackle, but he got all the reps at left, and then Wilkenformby got all the reps at right. And, save for a sloppy maybe first drive, a 3 and out. But, we had the headset communication issue that we saw down on the field, all kinds of things. I thought the offense played pretty well, but I want to turn it over to you guys talking about the offensive line and kind of shifting gears to this week with Kadyn Proctor's availability still up in the air. I know Kalen DeBoer has provided some positive comments about him, but it also wouldn't be shocking, I think, to any of us to see him not play against South Florida. But when you look at these options on this offensive line, just Jimmy, I'll start with you. Where do you look moving into week 2? Is it as simple as Elijah Pritchett just continuing to do things at left tackle, or do they maybe mix things up a little bit?
Well, see, I think it's two different questions. And based on Kalen DeBoer's comments, I think Kadyn Proctor is going to be back soon, maybe or maybe not this weekend, maybe or maybe not the following weekend, but he's clearly on track to come back. I think we would be having a different discussion if he wasn't. If Proctor's out for the season, now what are you going to do at left tackle? To me, it's a little different question when you got South Florida this week and maybe Wisconsin next week that you got to get through without Kadyn, and then presumably he's fine. For now, I think just sticking with Elijah Pritchett's the right thing to do if they ask me to vote in the staff meetings, which they haven't yet. They probably should. I think sticking with Pritchett is the right thing. We got to remember, yes, I know Pritchett struggles. We all see at times he struggles. At times he plays really well. I find what he's doing just typical of young players. He's still a sophomore. He missed his entire true freshman season with a significant upper body injury that caused him to miss all that time. Last year, he had no starts. Yes, he played with the ones at times. I don't believe he started a single game last year. I think this was his first start ever against Western Kentucky this past week. He's still a young player. The upside with Elijah Pritchett is still pretty phenomenal. I think at least one service rated him a 5-star. The last staff liked him a lot in terms of physically. The new staff clearly thinks a lot of him. They considered him sort of a co-starter even before Kadyn Proctor went out with his continued battle with Formby on the other side. I'd stick with Pritchett. I know there's going to be some rough spots, but hey, it's the SEC and he's a young player. Sometimes they got to go through it before they're ready. We saw it with Proctor a year ago, who struggled quite a bit in his first few starts. By the end of the year, had sort of figured it out and now is expected to be a real high-quality lineman. So I just stick with Pritchett, even though I realize we're going to watch him go through some growing pains.
No, I think you made a good point in saying that Proctor's prognosis is a positive one. Kalen DeBoer hasn't ruled out him playing against South Florida, but I think it looks like it might be a little further down the road, but sooner rather than later. He called it on his radio show a day-by-day situation rather than a week-by-week. And I think that, again, is positive. But, seeing what they do at practice, hearing from Coach Cap and even Tyler Booker, it sounds like they're kind of weighing their options a little bit, which is to be expected. They just had a giant curveball in the first game of the season. Coach Cap mentioned that guys like Wilkenformby and Miles McVay have also gotten reps at left tackle. I think Tyler Booker's probably has too. And that's where the benefit of bringing in a guy like Gino Vandemark, a veteran transfer in the spring, kind of helps you mix and match to get the 5 best players on the field. I don't know if we'll see Tyler Booker in this game coming up, but like you said, Jimmy, if it was a prolonged situation, maybe that's a more apt thing to do. So for Blake, when you look at these options beyond Pritchett, and I think we all agree that for the time being, Elijah Pritchett makes sense. What do you think of the other guys that are kind of rounding out the depth at that not necessarily left tackle position, but just the offensive line in whole?
Yeah, well, I think if we're assuming that this isn't going to be a long-term issue with Proctor, yes, Pritchett does make sense kind of as a plug-and-play guy there, and he played well. But you mentioned the option of Tyler Booker sliding out one spot to left tackle, and I think that's a really interesting prospect because Booker's a pretty well-rounded, kind of versatile player. He's played a little bit of tackle before. And I think overall, it's safe to say he's the best offensive lineman in the unit, and he's the best offensive line player on the team. So if you want to continue to use him, you could slide him out to that left tackle spot and put your best player at arguably the most important position on the offensive line when it comes to protecting the quarterback's blind side with Jalen Milroe. And then, like you mentioned, Gino Vandemark, the transfer from Michigan State, he's kind of viewed as a sixth man of sorts of the offensive line, and he has experience coming off the bench, and he's a guy that's played all of the interior slots. He was the guy that came in at center when Parker Brailsford's helmet came off. He was the backup center that came in, and he's also played guard before in his career. He could play any of the three interior offensive line spots. So I think if you're looking to maybe get your 5 best offensive linemen on the field, you can move Booker out to left tackle. You could slide Geno in at left guard, and then continue your play from there. I think those would be that would probably be the option to get your best guys on the field if you're not looking for just kind of the simple, you have a tackle that's competing for the right tackle spot, moving to left. That's another option that you have there.
Yeah, I think the bye week too, it comes at a good time for Alabama after this upcoming road trip to Wisconsin. And, it's going to be a tough trip up to Madison. It's a raucous environment. So whoever plays left tackle and whoever plays right tackle, they're going to have a tough time just from a communication standpoint. So any experience they can get any of these guys, I think is going to be beneficial. And speaking of experience, we're going to kind of transition to more looking at this game against South Florida. 63 points is a lot in an opener. Success, no doubt, on the offensive side of the ball. We saw a bunch of guys score in this first game. Jalen Milroe had 5 touchdowns. We already talked about the 2 to Ryan Williams. He had 1 to Kendrick Law. We saw 3 running backs get in the end zone with Justice, JM, and true freshman Daniel Hill. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys from a prediction standpoint. Who's the next player to score for this Alabama team? I was going to say offense, but maybe you have a little bit of a curveball with a defensive pick. I don't know. But in this game against South Florida, Jimmy, who's the guy who hasn't found the end zone yet this season to be the next guy to score for Alabama?
I'm glad I get to go first because I think my answer is very likely to be both of your answers or one of them. But my answer is Jeremy Bernard.
Yeah.
Who I thought would catch more balls than one, in the first game. But I also anticipated Jalen Milroe throwing the ball more than 9 times. I talked all year. One of my constant talking points all spring and summer was Jalen threw it 23 times a game last year. And this year, I think it's going to be 34 times a game. I said that so many times, and then he threw it 9 times in the first game. But him only throwing it 9 times, people are like, why didn't we throw it to Jeremy more? Why didn't we throw it to K-Law more? When you only throw it 9 times, there's only so many balls to go around. But This week, it's more likely the game plays out differently, allowing Alabama to run more of what we should expect to see every week. And that means a lot more than just 9 throws in the air from Milroe. So I think Jeremy Bernard is going to be targeted a lot. I think he's due. He's next. And I think he's a really good player. Blake mentioned maybe Ryan's the best receiver on the team. I agree. I'm shocked that I'm saying that already after week 1. I thought that might be something I might say in November. Mm-hmm. I mean, I thought that was realistic. Maybe by November, Ryan's the best receiver. Now I'm not so sure Ryan's not the best receiver right now. But if he's not, it's Jeremy Bernard. And I know we didn't get a real great look at him last week with just the 1 catch, which was a good play. But I think Jeremy's the next to score. And giving away a little bit of my piece tomorrow, I'll do my 4 predictions on Thursday piece, and it's going to predict a big day for Jeremy.
No, I think that's a good pick. And we were actually sitting up at the press box, and I kind of wondered out loud, like, when are they going to throw the ball to Jeremy Bernard? And I think it was the next play, if I'm not mistaken. I laid over to Blake, and I was like, where's Jeremy? And then he caught the corner route. So I think you're right. I think he could be a guy that's Alabama's wide receiver 1. By the time the season's over. I think he could be that by the time the month's over. But I think he's going to get more targets. And you're right, with 9 balls, it's tough to, see other guys make plays. But I think the guys that did get the ball in their hands, they did that. And so I think Alabama would be fine with Jalen Milroe going 7 for 9 for 200 and 3 touchdowns every week. But I agree with you. I think it's going to be more moving forward. So Blake, what's your pick? Who's the guy that you have next getting into the end zone?
Well, this isn't really a fair question because there's one main guy that hasn't really scored, and Jimmy already took him. So I would say Jeremy Bernard, but like you kind of go down the list. Both running backs scored. Jalen Milroe scored on the ground, so I can't use that cop out. You have Ryan Williams and K-Law both already scored 2. So give me Cole Adams to return a punt for a touchdown. That's got to be my
nice.
If I can't go with Jeremy Bernard, I was thinking either Jeremy Bernard or Kobe Prentice to score a receiving touchdown. But since we already kind of talked about the passing game and how we expect it to be more than 9 passes from Jalen Milroe this game. I'll go with Cole Adams because he looked really good at punt returner. It was kind of not necessarily a surprise, but we didn't know exactly who the punt returner was going to be. Coaches have talked about Jeremy Bernard, Kendrick Law as possible options there. Also, Jalen Mbakwe, I think he got some time later in the game. But Cole Adams was the guy from the start. He looked really explosive. And Kalen DeBoer talked about it today on the coaches' teleconference. And even Robert Gillespie got asked about it during coaches' interviews today that, he's an explosive guy, a guy that they trust. And he even thought, Coach Gillespie said that he even thought, looking back in the film, there were some seams and some creases that he could have found where he could have even housed one in the Western Kentucky game. And I think kind of everyone had this feeling that it was just a matter of time that he was going to find a crease and find a way to house one of these punts. And I think if I can't go with Jeremy Bernard, I'll go with Cole Adams to make a play on special teams and find his way in the end zone.
If it makes you feel any better, those are my top 2 picks for this. So I kind of was going to go a little different and go special teams because you're right. On the SEC teleconference, Kalen DeBoer was really effusive in his praise of Cole Adams. He even said that I'm going to read it here. Quote, "I think he'll have some big games here this fall where he gets targeted when we throw the ball more than we did on Saturday." So kind of, piggybacking off of what we talked about with Jalen in the passing game in week 1, if they're going to throw the ball around a little bit more, Cole Adams is going to be featured. Mm-hmm. So if it's not via punt return, heck, it might be on offense. So I think that's a good pick. I thought about leaning toward a tight end, maybe a red zone touchdown, giving the ball to CJ Free.
Cuevas.
Blake's got Josh Cuevas. But I'm going to go a little different here too. I'm going to go defensively because you heard from Kane Womack talking about the need for more turnovers and takeaways, and then them kind of leaving some things on the table in terms of not getting in the end zone. We saw Keon Sabb have 2 picks in the first game of the season. Why not get a third and take it to the house? So I'm going to go with Keon Sabb on defense to be the next guy to score.
Keon.
Yeah, and that kind of that goes into our next little predictions piece because sticking with the turnovers, Kane Womack mentioned how they wanted to get more of those. They want to create more turnovers because they had 2 in the opener with those 2 interceptions. They could have had some more. Deontay Lawson dropped what would have been maybe the first defensive touchdown of the season. And they could have, from a pressure standpoint, maybe gotten to the quarterback and gotten the ball loose. So I think turnovers is going to be a real point of emphasis this week, especially when you're facing a mobile quarterback like Byron Brown at South Florida. So start with you, Jimmy. Just when you look at the turnovers for this defense, we're going to take Keon Sabb out of it because he's already got 2 on the mantle. But who's the next guy that you think forces a turnover for this Alabama defense?
Yeah, getting back to the Kane Womack press conference that the 2 of you covered Monday, getting back to what he said, he went a little Saban, I think, on everybody when he's like unhappy with the shutout. And I'm like, what can they score negative points? Is that he wants South Florida at -4 points, but he wants more turnovers and he wants more aggressiveness. So I think we're going to see the players make a concerted effort to rate balls out and maybe instead of being satisfied with the sack, about a strip sack. And Q Robinson was fantastic getting to the quarterback on Saturday. I mean, a lot of the players were, but I thought Q in particular had what they call a really high win rate on Saturday night. Q was beating his guy and getting to the quarterback frequently, even though I think he was only credited with 1 sack. He was constantly back there. I'll go with Q Robinson with a strip sack on Saturday, causing the next turnover.
I like that. I think Q, he played well. He wasn't the first outside backer we saw on the field that went to Quay Russaw, but I think he's a guy that waited his turn, and to see him get the first sack of the season was really cool because those guys had to wait behind Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell. Heck, Q's old enough to be on the team whenever Will Anderson was shining as a true freshman. So I think he's a guy that it's good to see him get rewarded. And I like that pick a lot because I think they're going to continue to try to apply pressure to the quarterback, not only this coming week, but in the weeks to come. So for you, Blake, where are you going to go on the defensive side of the ball?
I'm going to stay kind of in the fumble territory, but I'm not going to go with the strip sack. Byron Brown, USF's quarterback, is really slippery. It's kind of a good word that I've heard a lot of people use to describe him. And he's very mobile. He gets out of the pocket. I think you could see one of the linebackers, either Deontay Lawson or Jahad Campbell, force a fumble on a hit just from a scramble, something like that. Kind of like you would see a lot with I think back to the 2016 Alabama defense when you had those linebackers that were always ripping at the ball, whether it was Reuben Foster or Tim Williams or guys like that who just punched at the ball and made guys fumble and knocked it loose. And with Kane Womack being the guy who was kind of focusing on that, focusing on, like Jimmy mentioned, just raking at the ball and trying to force turnovers that way. I'm sure that's been a big emphasis in practice and something that they're going to be kind of keyed in on. And so that's what I'm going to go with. I was thinking about maybe an interception. Maybe you see, I don't think Damani Jackson got targeted many times, so maybe they start to test him. But I'll go with a fumble from one of the two inside linebackers.
I think that's a safe bet because those guys were flying around this past Saturday. I thought Jahad Campbell played. He's probably the best defensive player on the field, even though Keon Sapp had the 2 interceptions. Jahad he was really unbelievable. And, hearing from him this week in interviews, he's locked in, man. He didn't have a lot of words. When I asked about the South Florida game, he just said, we'll see on Saturday. And so I think this team is motivated, which the defense didn't really play that poorly in Tampa last year. They only gave up 3 points in a monsoon, or at least a partial monsoon. So I think linebacker, though, the way that those two guys played is a safe bet. Heck, like we mentioned at the top, Deontay Lawson could have had a pick 6 in week 1. But for me, I think if the emphasis is on pressuring the quarterback, that's going to lead to poor decisions from Byron Brown. And I think a guy like Malachi Moore, how many times have we seen him, even though a lot of the times it was there at that star position, he's just in the right place at the right time. And he's a guy that can take it to the house. So I think Malachi in his second game, when they're going to be honoring
he had a pick against him last year.
Yeah, he's a guy that he always finds the football. And I think, you would like to go a different direction because the interceptions were so prevalent in week 1, but I just think it's going to continue for that safety duo. I think they're going to pile up multiple picks this year. And by multiple, I mean each with 5 or more. So I think Malachi is next man up. I think he's a guy that's going to make a lot of big plays. And like I said, he's going to make a play on a field that's going to be named after his former coach. And that's going to lead us to our final little topic here.
Nice.
On Saturday, we're going to get the official dedication of Saban Field at Bryant-Denny Stadium. There's going to be kind of like a ceremony, I think, at the end of the Walk of Champions, an hour before the actual Walk of Champions. And then at halftime, they're going to do something inside the stadium. But they're going to recognize Coach Saban, and rightfully so. I'm in the camp that believes they should have renamed the stadium completely, maybe drop the Denny and just leave it over on the quad. But I think that there's going to be a lot of familiar faces in town. We've already seen Scott Cochran. I'm sure there's going to be more. They're also going to recognize the 2014 SEC championship team. So a big reunion this weekend, and that brings back memories. And something I wanted to ask you guys is just what was maybe your favorite or most memorable home game at Bryant-Denny Stadium during Saban's tenure? There were a lot of wins, a lot of big games, some not very close, some closer than you would want. But starting with you, Jimmy, just what's a home game that sticks out with you from the past 17 years?
And it's fitting that they're honoring the 2014 SEC champions and first Alabama team to make a 14 college football playoff, because that's part of my answer here is, Alabama won the national championship in 2009 and 2011 and 2012 and in 2013 came really close. I mean, the kick 6 cost Alabama a slot in the playing for the SEC championship, and Alabama may have won it in 2013 if that happened. But the point is, you go into 2014, and I'll admit, I admitted at that time, and I'll admit it now, I had some real doubts about the 2014 team, period. I had some questions about the personnel on defense, but my biggest question was about quarterback. I wasn't sure Blake Sims was good enough. So my favorite memory was the Florida game in 2014, or my favorite memory, because Blake took my doubts and sent them down the Black Warrior River. Blake threw, I believe, 449 yards, 4 touchdowns, interception. I think it was either the Alabama all-time single game school record or second. It was first or second all time in a game I went into doubting whether he was good enough. Is Blake good enough? Boy, was he. And SEC Player of the Year, SEC champion, getting Alabama to the playoff. Blake flushed my fears that day. And to get back to Nick Saban, I still think 2014, incredible coaching job on the part of Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin for turning Blake into not only a winning quarterback, but a championship winning quarterback based on where Blake was as a quarterback earlier in his career at Alabama. That was amazing work with him, and obviously a lot of hard work by Blake. But 2014 Florida for me will be one of my all-time favorite Saban memories in Bryant-Denny Stadium.
That's a good one. It was a fun game to watch. I remember that first touchdown to Kenyon Drake, just thinking like, oh, this is how this game's going to go. So that one was entertaining for sure. And sticking with the Blake theme, Blake, what was your favorite game? I know. Look, okay. First things first. I'm going to share this because we shared it before we started recording. I was talking about the 2009 season being my senior year of high school, which probably makes Jimmy shudder a little bit. I don't know why I asked Blake. I said, Blake, how old were you in 2009? And the man said 7 years old. So Blake might have had to watch.
It made me throw up my tapioca pudding.
Yeah.
I threw up my tapioca pudding all over the place.
So Blake would probably some of these games he had to watch on YouTube. But what was your favorite? What was your favorite home game?
I was 39 in 09. I was 39 in 09.
Well, I had a couple options. One of them was from that same 2014 team, the Iron Bowl that season, the highest scoring Iron Bowl in the history of the rivalry. But the answer I'm going to give is a year later, the 2015 LSU game, because that season was coming off of, at the time, like you said, Jimmy, championships in 09, 11, 12. 2013 is the kick six, and they miss out on the SEC championship. 2014, that same season, they go to the college football playoff and lose the Sugar Bowl as the 1 seed to Ohio State, who goes on and wins the title. So 2 years between titles was kind of the most that you had seen in the Nick Saban era to that point. And on top of that, Alabama lost its week 3 game to Ole Miss at home in Bryant-Denny Stadium. And that's when you had a whole host of people declaring the dynasty dead, coming off of 2 years of no championship and then an early season loss. And also to throw in, you had lost bowl games both of those years too. So the dynasty was dead, so to speak. And then Alabama went on the road, beat Georgia, and they were kind of on this upward trajectory, being ranked in like they were 10th, and then they were 9th, and then 8th, and they climbed and climbed and climbed. And this early November date was circled with an LSU team that was ranked number 2 in the country. They had the Heisman frontrunner in Leonard Fournette, who was averaging like 150 yards a game. He had a couple games of like 250. He looked like the best player in the country. And Alabama, I think, had climbed to number 4 at that point going into that game. So you have Alabama at home, number 4, LSU number 2. This is kind of at the height of Nick Saban and Les Miles. And whenever those two teams would go at it when they were the coaches, it was just NFL players all over the field. I mean, it still feels like it is with LSU sometimes, but that's that rivalry that's kind of born out of both of these teams just being really good and really talented. And in that game, Alabama won. I think the final score was 30-16, and kind of a dominating game. It wasn't exactly the closest game, but it was kind of a vintage Alabama, just like grind and wear you down over the course of the game. And it was the same game that Derrick Henry ran for, I think, 220 or so yards. And also the game, the Alabama defense famously held Leonard Fournette to 31 yards on 19 carries. And so whenever you have the Heisman frontrunner get held to 31 yards and have less than 2 yards a carry, while Derrick Henry ran for 200 and whatever he did, he kind of leapfrogged Leonard Fournette into kind of first place in the Heisman Trophy watch for the rest of that season. And on top of that, you had Alabama kind of establishing, like, we're not going anywhere. Like, this team is still the top of the SEC. It's still the team to beat in the SEC. And from then on, you had Alabama was arguably the favorite to win the title, and they went on and did so, beating Clemson in that game in Arizona to win the national championship game. So I think that was kind of a monumental game that season, and also proved in a 2015 season that I think holds dear to a lot of Alabama fans' hearts, because it proved that the dynasty wasn't dead after that week 3 loss to Ole Miss, and they went on winning kind of a national championship after a season that was very much filled with a lot of adversity, and one that they didn't think they were going to necessarily get a championship type team out of early in the season.
I like that. And I like that we picked different games And for you guys, I think the reasoning is valid. Blake, the game you picked was on my list, but for me, I thought about like how it made me feel and like what I was doing. And that 2009 season again is my senior year of high school. Sorry, Jimmy, but it's whenever you really start to care, you know what I mean? And like you're hanging out with your buddies that you're going to go on to college with, the guys that I watched the games with that year, or the guys that I roomed with when I was at Alabama. And that 2009 season was just so much fun. It's my senior year, my senior football season. And thinking back to that game against Tennessee and the way that it ended and just the way that that building erupted, it's tough to beat that. The way the game ended with Terrence Cody blocking that field goal, I still believe to this day that had he not gotten his giant paw on it, that Julio Jones would have just headbutted the ball because he jumped so high to block it. But then to see Lane Kiffin's face and just the disappointment of the Tennessee fans after the game, it's tough to beat. I mean, like for me, I thought also of the Iron Bowl that season because it was another just exciting game and the way that it ended. But man, for a game that has a nickname like that, and for Alabama to be on the winning end of it so early in Nick Saban's tenure, and for it to kind of start with just a long run of dominant wins over Tennessee, it's tough to beat that one for me. I also thought, I actually asked my wife this, and she didn't really hesitate, which kind of shocked me because she's one that doesn't tend to care. She mentioned the 2013 LSU game, and because she remembered Zach Mettenberger. And the way
crawling off the
field. And I know like that's not really pertinent to what we're talking about, but everybody has those games that
I remember that. I'll always remember that scene, that visual.
Right.
I'll always remember it. Then Zach ended up coaching at Alabama.
But it's just one of those things that like I think these games, the way that you remember them is a lot of how they made you feel. And back when you're still a high school senior going into college, you remember the people you were with and everything that went along with it. So for me, it's a little different because, I mean, obviously doing this job for the last 11 seasons, you see all these home games, you see those moments, and they become work almost. But back then, those games in 2009, especially that game against Tennessee, I'll never forget that one. So it's going to be a big Saturday in Tuscaloosa. Nick Saban being honored before the game. Obviously, South Florida coming to town, a little bit of a revenge from last year's outcome, even though Alabama won that game in Tampa. I don't think anybody was pleased with it, but we've got a ton of coverage on that. We've got a ton of coverage coming, and just a lot to look forward to this weekend. So do you guys have anything else you want to get off your chest before we get out of here?
I'd just say that it's funny to me that this feels like a revenge game because Alabama literally won the game a year ago, and almost no one mentions how great the defense played. Everybody talks about a disaster, almost lost. The defense played really well against what ended. That South Florida quarterback last year threw for 3,000 yards and rushed for 1,000, and Alabama held them to just 3 points. Dallas Turner, by the way, played out of his mind in that game. Alabama's defense played really well, but it still feels like a revenge game. And how many, even though we're out for revenge, how many of these offensive stars played against South Florida last year? Very few of them. No Jalen Milroe, very little Justice Haynes and Jan Miller. There'll be a lot of them Saturday. Ryan Williams is new. Jeremy Bernard is new. Cole Adams is new.
Kendrick Law had food poisoning.
Kendrick Law was out. Tyler Booker was out against South Florida. He's obviously back. So a lot of new guys.
I don't think Jaden Roberts started that game either.
No, he did not. I think Dalcourt was still playing right guard at that point. So that's a great point. So it feels like a revenge game, but the defense doesn't need any revenge. The offense does, but the offense is largely brand new in terms of who the playmakers are. So it really has nothing to do with revenge, but you know what it feels like? A revenge game.
Yeah. Depending on when this video comes out, we'll have some content on Jalen Milroe making his first start against South Florida. Little tease there for what's to come at BamaOnLine. So, Blake, you got anything else?
Don't think so. That's just a good point from Jimmy about the guys that didn't play. We even had interviews Coach Robert Gillespie, the running backs coach. Him and Freddie Roach were the two Alabama staffers that were a part of last season's staff that were with that team that had that really close game to South Florida. And he said the players that were there, they didn't play to the standard that they expect of themselves. And he said, It's not about the opponent. It's not about the fact that it's South Florida on the other end of the field, but it's about playing up to the level that they expect of themselves. And so he said the guys haven't really been needing any motivational speeches this week about kind of what happened the last time these two teams played. They just know that there's a standard that they want to play to, and that's the level of execution that they want to put on the field Saturday.
Yeah, I don't think they'll need any extra motivation for this one, especially the guys that are back. So it'll be a lot of fun on Saturday. Stick with us at BamaOnLine. If you guys are watching via YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe so Tim Moss doesn't kill me. And until next time, everybody, we'll see you on the next show.